Willkommen in Deutschland! You have some questions about the job market here for techies? All good, we're going to answer all of those questions coming right up. Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be answering a load of questions from people all over Twitter, from my network, about finding a job in tech in Germany. We're going to answer everything from how to find the jobs through to interview techniques, assessing companies, and then also looking at the general questions about the atmosphere that exists in Germany. So I've broken it down into kind of those four rough sections. Let's get started. We have no time to spare. The first question that I received was, where do I look for jobs? Now, this one is kind of simple and kind of not simple. The easiest way to describe it is that LinkedIn and Xing are still the best places to look for work in Germany. Now, the question I actually received, if I'm saying it word for word, was where do I look for jobs other than LinkedIn? And I would say LinkedIn is actually not the best place to look for work in Germany. A lot of the time, people or old school kind of German companies are not posting on LinkedIn. So especially if you can speak German, you would really benefit from looking into Xing and also just checking general jobs boards. I think one of the big ones here is Indeed, but actually I have another tip that I would recommend, which is to look into companies that you are interested in and see if they have positions. So, what do I mean? Well, for example, I use a budgeting app on my phone, and one of the first things I did was go and see if they were hiring for engineers, right? You could do the same thing with any app that you use that you love, or any website you use that you love. Go and have a look at their jobs boards. Some of the bigger companies in particular will be posting on LinkedIn, on Xing, on all these platforms, but maybe smaller to medium-sized startups might not. And so it's really worth just going to their sites and checking manually as well. The big second question, and I'm going to answer this one straight up because I know that a lot of you are wondering, do I have to speak German to find work in the German market? The answer is no, you don't have to speak German, but it does help a lot. As you can imagine, Germany has a real lack of engineers and techies right now. So what they need are more programmers. The problem is that a lot of the people hiring for those positions do not necessarily speak English or are not comfortable working in English, and so you will find that a lot of companies are still operating in German, even if their documentation, for example, is in English, or if the language that they're writing in is in English. Now, obviously, if you are spending a lot of time learning a programming language, you might not want to go out of your way to also learn German at the same time. I would say having a basic understanding of German would be helpful. For example, there are some situations where the company is comfortable with you speaking English and not speaking German, but the recruiter who they've hired to fill the position only speaks German, or maybe only speaks a little bit of English. So it is worth learning enough German to have a basic conversation about yourself. So let's say about a B1 level. I would really strongly recommend getting to that level. But if you don't speak German, then, I mean, what are you going to do? Not apply to jobs? Go for it anyway. Apply in English. You can even apply to jobs that are advertised in German with English, but just be prepared not to hear back from them, because a lot of them, if they're advertising in German, that's usually a sign that they want people who can speak German. If they're advertising in English, then I'd say go for it 100%. The next question's a little bit about me and what my experience was. It was, did you apply to jobs requiring experience, and how did you make up for the experience needed? Yes, I did. The reason I did is because the big tip I heard that I really want to share with you is to apply for any position where you meet 50% of the criteria. Now, this might sound a little bit ridiculous if you're not familiar with the job market. You might think, why would I apply to a job that I can only half do? Well, you have to remember that job ads are often describing their ideal candidate. Like I said, there is a real lack of programmers and engineers in Germany. I mean, I'm not saying they won't find an ideal candidate, but they're probably having trouble. you know? So you have to try to position yourself to fulfill as many criteria as you can, but if you only fulfill half of them, focus on that half. Something that I used to say in a lot of my applications was, focus on all the strengths. I'd talk about all the dot points I met. And if there was one big one, let's say they needed someone who was a specialist in Docker, and I am not yet, anyway, a specialist in Docker, then I would mention, I haven't worked with Docker yet, but I'm confident and capable at learning new languages and new technologies. And I don't doubt that if this were a requirement of my job, I could apply myself to learn this before my start date, or I could work on learning this before my start date so that I had a basic understanding, or something along those lines. So you don't need to, I wouldn't focus on all the criteria that you don't meet, but certainly you can make up for it in other ways. In terms of experience, since you're going back to the question at hand, in terms of experience, I would often focus on the experience I did have. So I worked in digital marketing for a while, and I also worked with project management. So I would say, although this would be my first developer position, or although this might be my first programming position, I have worked with these technologies in the past, and I have a lot of experience working in teams solving problems in the digital marketing sphere. So it doesn't make up for the experience, but you have to understand that firstly, recruiters are a little bit flexible nowadays because they really need people, right? Secondly, you have other experience that you can bring in, I am sure of it. So I would just apply to any job where you meet 50% of the criteria, and be honest, obviously don't lie, but even if you've been making websites for a year, say that. Although I don't have any workplace experience, or although I've never worked in a developer role before, I have been making websites for over a year. I mean, even that is something that the recruiter can kind of grab onto, and it might get you a phone interview. Okay, will you get through to the final job? Maybe, maybe not, who knows? But the main goal of your first application has to be to get an interview. So that's a really long answer. I got a little bit rambly. I hope you stuck with it. But the basic answer is yes, I applied for jobs that required experience I didn't have. And the reason is because I believed that I could convince them I was good enough to learn the points that I didn't have, and that I would be able to make up for it in enthusiasm and those kinds of things. The next question was, when do I send my certificate? So this is actually a question from someone who did the same course that I did, which was a 1-year web development course, and they have a certification, and they said, when do I send it? When do I send it with my document? Now, if there's anything that you've probably learned, especially if you're an expat already living in Germany, it is that Germans love paperwork. They are super formal. It's a bit old school. So I would say send it right away. You've got nothing to lose. I mean, think of it this way. If you don't send the certificate, then they might think, is the certificate legit, or does it really exist, or whatever, or can they prove that they know this stuff? And then, there might be some doubt there. If you do send it, then that person is happy. Now let's talk about another recruiter who doesn't want your certificate. Okay, you don't send your certificate, no problem. But if you do send your certificate and they didn't want it, they'll just be like, oh, that's nice, but I don't need that. Okay? So that's a much better situation to be in. So either way, the safest bet is to send your certificate. So if you've got a certificate or a degree or anything along those lines, any piece of paper that you think backs up the skills you have, I would send it. Personally, I come from Australia. We're a little more loosey-goosey about this stuff. So personally, I wish that German recruiting world society would relax a little bit in this sense. But unfortunately, that is the way it is right now. And if you want to play that game, then I would send certificates immediately. So those are the 4 questions I received around the topic of applying for jobs. I do want to add that I do have a series about improving your LinkedIn and improving your interview skills and these kinds of things. I really recommend reading about improving your LinkedIn, because a lot of the tips in there will also help with your CV and with cover letters as well. So do check that out, and then we can move on to the next big topic. So the second area we're going to look for is kind of this hazy area in between when you apply and when you do your first interview. And that is 3 questions. The first is how you find information about the person taking your application, right? And this, I take this to mean either when you first apply or when you've received a phone interview and you want to kind of suss out who this person is and what they want to know about you. So I would say that the easiest way is, of course, just to look them up on LinkedIn or on Xing. I've mentioned Xing a few times here, but it's worth mentioning Xing, xing.de. That is like the German LinkedIn. It is a little bit old-fashioned. Personally, I think it's going out of favor, but a lot of employers are still there. A lot of jobs are still posted there, so it's worth having a profile as a foreigner. I strongly recommend doing that. So yes, I would say look up on Xing or look up on LinkedIn and just try to find that person. And if you can't, then that brings us to question 2, which is how do I assess if the company values match my own? Now, the first thing is that if you can't find information about an individual, the next best thing is to find information about the company, of course. And company values are really hard to assess as someone on the outside, right? Because most companies will say something like, oh, we value work-life balance, we're flexible, we work in an agile team, right? I can almost write it myself without even knowing what company you're applying to. The problem is that a lot of companies say this stuff, not all of them actually do that stuff. So the easiest way to find out is to go onto Kununu. Now, if you don't know Kununu, it's a great little website where employees, past and present, yes, there we go, past and present, not future, can assess the company they worked for, and they usually give ratings. It'll say what field they worked in, how flexible they are, what the team is like, what the equal opportunities are like inside. It is always worth checking what people are saying on Kununu. The other one you can check is Glassdoor. I would say Kununu is more popular in Germany, but Glassdoor still often does have reviews from people. So if it's a smaller company, you might only find them on Kununu, but if they're a bigger company, you'll find them on Glassdoor as well, probably. So I would say read through those, get an idea for it. Much like Amazon reviews for products, don't take anything as gospel. There are always disgruntled employees, right? Don't forget, plenty of people are unhappy with their former employers, and that's why they leave. So you have to remember that it's not always going to be 100% truthful. Don't see like one bad review and go, oh, well, company's not for me. It is worth reading through. What I like to do is I like to read through and see if there are any common threads. For example, one that I see a lot is, management tries to control everything we do, for example. And if you see that, and you see that from one person, and you can be like, okay, maybe they were just a renegade trying to do lots of weird stuff. But if like every second review is talking about micromanagement, then you know they're probably going to be micromanaging. In terms of diversity, I mean, this wasn't a direct question here, but if you're talking about company values of diversity, the best thing you can do is just look up a photo of the team. A lot of the time, these places will have pictures on their websites of their team together at team events. Obviously, in the year of Corona, it's a little bit harder to find those kinds of photos, but normally that will give you an idea of what the makeup is of the team. Of course, again, I wouldn't take that as being indicative of a bad culture if, for example, you're not seeing a lot of diversity, because it could be that that's something they know is a problem and that they're really working on fixing. So you never know, but I would say that's usually something that, if I'm being quite honest, that's something that I use to get a feel for that. The last question on the topic of this weird in-between spot is, what are some red flags? So, I mean, I've mentioned a few. I think if the rating on Kununu is significantly low, and if a lot of people are saying a lot of the same stuff, or you're seeing a lot of values that don't align with yours in the company description, that's obviously not great. High turnover is, of course, another one. This is a hard one to assess, but I suppose if you really wanted to dig deep, you could look into LinkedIn and have a look at former employees and see how long they've stayed at the company. The company that I ended up signing up with, Novatech in Berlin, when I was looking at some of the employees there, I was noticing a huge proportion of the employees I looked up had been working there for 5, 7, 8, 10 years. And that was something that really made my ears perk up, because that said to me, okay, they're happy in this environment. And as someone looking for a long-term position, I was also like, okay, like maybe this is actually somewhere I could stay for a long time. So obviously I'm very happy about that. So I'm doing a little bit of a brag there, but at the same time, I really do think that it's worth looking into how, like, what kind of averages are we looking at here? If people are just staying for a year, if a lot of people are staying for a year and then moving on, you know, you might want to have a little bit of a think about whether you want to go into that environment. But if you're seeing a lot of people who have been there for a while, that's probably a really good sign. Another red flag I want to mention, because it happened to me in an interview, is if someone, especially if you're a woman applying, keep an ear out for like comments that are kind of a little, one of the things I heard from a recruiter was, are you sure you want a full-time position? Because I know you've got a small child at home. Well, I don't know, like I can't confirm that recruiter was not saying the same thing to male applicants, but it was definitely something that just made me go, okay. The other red flag that I've heard in an interview is when they said, oh, yeah, you know, a lot of our engineers, you know, they're so busy all the time. They're always working up to here. Okay. Also not a great sign if a company is saying, well, we're work-life balance oriented, and then the recruiter is saying, oh, the software engineers are super stressed, right? I mean, you know, put 2 and 2 together. So there are some really obvious red flags like those. But I would say, yeah, the turnover rate is a big one. So yeah, long answer, but I hope that helps. Okay, let's talk about interviews. These next 4 questions are all kind of about interviews and how you do interviews. Now, I'm already putting together a lot of video tips about how to do interviews, how to answer common interview questions, including live mock interviews with people here on my channel. So I really do recommend checking those out if you want more details on this. But I'm going to talk about 4 questions that I received specifically about interviews in Germany. The first was how to answer the salary question. What is your salary expectation? My advice here is always to go higher than you think. So whatever amount you would actually be happy with, add 5k to it. That's my general approach. You can look up on Gehalt.de, that's GEHALT.de. That will actually tell you can type in a job title in there and it will show you what the average wage or average salary is for someone in that position. So you can get an idea of what kind of range to work in there, but then whatever amount you think you'd be happy with, add 5k. Now, the reason is this: if you're a good candidate, the recruiter will never hear that amount and then say, oh, well, you're out. The worst that will happen, and this happened to me, I said to someone, okay, this is my number, and she said, oh, well, you know, that's on the high side because, you know, this other person just got hired for 5k less. And I said, okay, well, the reason I give that number is because I know that I'm not someone coming in with 0 work experience. I know how to work in a team. I know how to manage projects. Secondly, I believe in my ability as a programmer, and I know that I can provide a lot of value in that way to the company. But of course, if the company culture and the job is good enough, then I am willing to be flexible on that amount, right? And do you know what she said at the end? She said, okay, I'm going to pass you along for the next stage. You know, so you have to also keep in mind that they are looking for people and you are representing potential to them. The worst that will happen is that they'll offer you a lower amount. That's fine. You can negotiate from there. But the good thing about asking for 5K more than you actually want is that they will then, if they offer you a lower amount, it's more likely to be what you actually wanted in the first place, right? Or close to it. So that's a really good way to go. Now, I do have to say that's my honest answer about how I would do things, because I am terrible at avoiding this question. I've seen a lot of strategies online about how to dodge the salary question or how to get around the salary question. You know, you say things like, what is the range that you're looking at? Or what do you think would be an appropriate compensation amount for someone with my level of experience? These are other approaches you can take. I do feel like if you have a few years of experience under your belt already, those are easier approaches to take. I feel like if you're a junior, I feel like it's a little bit harder. If you have the confidence and the ability to ask those kinds of questions back, then go for it. Personally, I always just got really awkward, and no matter how much I intended to use one of those strategies, I just never did. I just always ended up giving them a number. So that's why I gave you the advice of going 5K over what you think or what you'd be happy with, because in my experience, in the heat of the moment, no matter how much you intend to play the game, often a number will just come out of your mouth. So be prepared for that to happen, and go high. Go on the high side. The next question is whether I talked about projects in my portfolio. I didn't. I think though it's a good thing to do, especially if you're someone who doesn't have proven work experience. I think talking about your projects is a good idea. I think if there's a project you're particularly proud of, then work it into the conversation. A lot of the first interview levels are more about you as a person and your work history, and then the second interview is often more about tech and about your tech base. But sometimes your first interview is actually with your team lead or something along those lines. And in that case, you can feel much more open to doing that. For example, if someone says, so I see that you've also learned a bit about the back end. And I could say, oh yes, I've just started learning Node and how to build an Express server. I actually recently created a little banking app where someone can log in and then add money and remove money from their account, or, deposit and withdraw money from their account. And that's a great little app that allowed me to practice those skills. That's a possible way you could kind of work it in when they ask you about your stack. I'm sure that some people would also ask, are there any projects you're particularly proud of? That would also give you the opportunity to give an answer there. So there are different ways that you can talk about your projects, but certainly if it's relevant to the conversation, then do it. With a recruiter or like someone who isn't in tech themselves and is just getting a feel for you as a person, I wouldn't worry too much about talking about your projects yet. Maybe, if you've got something particularly impressive, like you've done a clone of Facebook, a fully functional clone of Facebook or something, then yeah, you can mention something like that. But a lot of the time, I think early on, you're more about selling yourself. And then as you start talking to more technically minded people, that would be a time to really talk about your project some more. Which naturally, this last question kind of leads into the next one, which is how technical were the interviews that I had? The interviews I had were mostly non-technical. I got quite lucky in that I got a job in a reasonably short amount of time and without actually ever doing a technical test, but that is not the normal way of things. So don't take that as like the normal experience. But certainly I would say that, as I said, the first interview is likely more about you as a person or as a worker and or as a programmer generally. And then the second interview will be more about your knowledge, what you're interested in, what you're pursuing, where you'd like to go with it. So I would say be more prepared for technical questions in that second interview. I love this next question about interviews. It's how do I demonstrate an eagerness to learn, and how do I demonstrate soft skills? This is really hard to do, especially in an interview environment. But I would say the cover letter here is going to be your best friend. In your cover letter, you should be if in a technical role, right, they're going to list something along the lines of communication skills or ability to work in a team or something like that, I would say always pick at least one soft skill to talk about in your cover letter. So if it's works well in a team, then you could say something like, oh, I completed a group project with a team of 5 people, and together we created this site that does XYZ, right? Or in my case, I was the class representative in my course. And so I often mention that. I said, oh, like, you know, I consider myself as someone who has leadership potential. I was elected class representative by my classmates as I was completing my course. And I think that allowed me to work closely with them to represent them and understand their concerns as well. You know, like these kinds of things. I would try to find a practical example that shows you have those skills. If you don't have one, then you can use people say. So I can see in your job description that XYZ company is looking for someone who has good communication skills. People often tell me that I'm very good at expressing what I think, and I'm also very good at listening to their concerns. I use this to create a collaborative environment where projects can be achieved while taking everyone's perspective into consideration. That's an example of how you could kind of phrase it. It is difficult to demonstrate, obviously. The reason that a lot of the first interviews are about you as a person is because they're trying to work that out, right? They're trying to work out what you're like as a colleague. So also, this is actually, you know what, this is actually a good way to think of it. When you are talking to an interviewer, remember that they're people. Like, this isn't a top-down thing. This is a side-to-side thing. Like, you're a person, they're a person. Talk to them like a person. I don't mean to constantly plug my own videos, but I did create a video about this, which is called Don't Be Deferent. Talk to people like they're people. You know, when you start the conversation, you can ask them a little bit about themselves. Oh, so, you know, how long have you worked for the company? Or like, you know, what position did you start off in, and all this kind of stuff. Often you'll find, you know, they got a promotion a few months ago and you can say, oh, congratulations, that's awesome. Or they've been working in this field for a few years now, and you can say, oh, wow, you must be very experienced. You know, you can just talk to them like you're having a conversation at a party or at a cafe. You know, it doesn't have to be this weird, tense thing. And I would strongly encourage you to do that, because not only does that help create a nicer environment for an interview, but it also helps demonstrate soft skills, right? It shows them that you are someone who is good at communicating and making other people feel valued. So that's a good thing to do. How to demonstrate an eagerness to learn. It has to come from your energy. Like, there's no other way. Like, it sucks. I get it. It sucks if you're an introvert or a low energy person, but you are genuinely eager to learn. If you are going to show emotion or energy or come out of your shell at any point in the interview, this is the time to do it. It's when you say, oh, you know, if let's say I'm a quiet person, Anna trying to be an introvert, this is fun. Okay, so like, let's say I'm a more quiet person, and generally I talk like this, and I feel like I've done quite a lot of work in my course to be sufficiently good at web development now to achieve a junior position. But, you know, I know that I can learn any stack that I'm given. I'm really excited to do that. So if I'm given that opportunity, then I would really appreciate an opportunity, because I think that I could do a really good job and that I can learn anything to do with programming. I'm excited to learn. Yeah. So even if you are more softly spoken like that I apologize if that is somehow a stereotype to introverts. I'm trying. But even if that is the only moment where you come out of that little shell that you have, it has to be then. Yeah, it has to be then. Because if they see that spark, tick, then they'll see, oh, oh, this person isn't just like doing this out of obligation or duty. They really want to learn this. They really want to do well. Yeah, so it has to come from there. I would, yeah. Practice in front of a mirror. I know I always say this and people hate doing it, and I get it, it sucks, but record yourself or practice in front of a mirror just saying those kinds of sentences. I'm really excited to get started. I know I can learn any tech stack. I'm a fast learner and I'm enthusiastic. Yeah, the word enthusiastic should like drip out of you. So yeah, that would be my advice in terms of interviews. But as I said, I'm doing a lot of videos right now about job interview techniques, all that kind of stuff. So check all that stuff out if you are very curious about this topic. Now, the last area, I got 3 questions that are kind of almost identical, and they're all focused around the same idea. So let me read them out to you, and I know it's a little bit boring to read them out to you, but I think it's important. The first question is, how difficult is it for people with unrelated education, for example, foreign languages, to get an interview? How do German employers consider previous unrelated education? Okay, that's the first one. So it's about having an education that is not about tech or science even, let's say. Okay, the second one says this. Most career advice for getting into tech we come across seems to be focused on America or the UK. I often wonder if all of that same advice is applicable to the German job market, more specifically on the chances for self-taught developers, right? So this is saying, are there actually opportunities for self-taught developers in Germany? And the last one is, I want advice to get into this market to make a career change that I'm already studying for. Do companies give chances to career changes, or do they prefer hiring fresh students, right? Okay, so again, kind of like about career changing. So unrelated education is the first question. The second one's about being self-taught, and the third is about career changes. And all in all, this comes down to one question, right? Which is, will German companies hire someone who doesn't have a degree in tech? Well, I'm here, aren't I? I don't have a degree in tech. So I have a Bachelor of Arts in Media and Communications. I also have a Master of Music. So I do have a master's degree, but not really in programming. And I've got a job. And I know a lot of people who do have jobs who did not get a degree in tech. But I agree with the second question where it says a lot of the advice you hear will be aimed at the US or the UK market. And I can also talk about the Australian market. If you can do the job, that is the most important thing in those markets. In Germany, they are a bit more traditional. They do care about pieces of paper. Part of the reason that I ended up getting a certification in web development, even though I already had the skills I needed like 6 months ago or something, is because I knew how much they valued the piece of paper. I know people who have gotten jobs with a 3-month boot camp who have been programming for a long time but still did the boot camp. I know a lot of people who got jobs out of the same course I did, which again was a 1-year web development course with a certification. I know people who have done it with degrees in tech. That's the easy road, so to speak. I will say I don't know personally anyone who's been hired in Germany without any sort of formal education or certification. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I'm sure someone out there has done it, especially probably in more modern cities like Berlin, I would imagine. But I don't know them if they're out there. If someone watching this has done it, then please comment because I'd love to hear your story. But generally, if that's going to happen, then it's going to happen through contacts. So I would say if you feel like you can't do a boot camp or you can't do a certification and you can't do a degree, then I would strongly recommend networking being your first priority. Yeah, I will say your chances aren't good, especially if you also can't speak German. then I would say really it's going to be a hard road for you. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to be like, yeah, you can do anything. Like you can do anything, but it will be a harder road for you. I would recommend any sort of German-based piece of paper you can get your hands on. I would do it. Obviously there are online certifications, include those, but just know that a lot of German employers won't be thrilled about them, and you'll come up against a lot of walls, especially because a lot of tech leads now are people themselves who did computer science degrees, right? So to them, the idea that someone could, go online and just do some online courses for a few months or a year or even 2 years and be at the same level as other juniors who just got out of university is really hard for them to understand, right? And it's not that they're trying to gatekeep, but it does end up happening that way, because they know how valuable their education was to them. They struggle to imagine how you could do the same thing without that, right? Okay, I disagree with it, but I'm just trying to explain the perspective that you'll come up against. I will say that having a degree in anything is helpful to an extent, especially if you can draw the connection. A lot of for example, my media communications degree didn't involve much tech, but I did occasionally submit assignments in website form when I was in that degree. I didn't have to, but I went out of my way to do it. So that was something that I spoke about in my interview with Novatech as well, because I was trying to kind of show that even though I didn't learn development in that degree, I still tried to use it in some way. As said though, it is tricky. I think, unfortunately, like I love the Odin project, for example. I think it is an amazing course of study. In many ways, I find it more thorough than the 1-year course that I did. And yet, if I turned up with a certificate from the Odin project versus the certification I got from my in-person course, there is no doubt to me which one a German recruiter will actually value. So I'm not saying it's grounded in reality. I'm not saying it's any reflection on your abilities at all. I am saying it will be hard to convince them. Yeah. And again, this goes back to trying to get into the interview. If you can get into the interview and then prove yourself in an interview environment, they'll be more willing to overlook that stuff. That's the problem, right? How to get in there, how to get your foot in the door. Let's have a little look. What else was asked? Do companies give a chance to career changes, or do they prefer hiring fresh students? Both. They do give a chance to career changes, but they also prefer hiring fresh students. I would say, the thing is, there's no point worrying about what the company prefers or who you're up against, right? You can't control that. You can't control what the recruiter you're talking to likes and doesn't like, and you can't control who else is applying for a job. So I would say don't worry too much about it, just keep applying. And as I said, just focus on making a really strong cover letter that focuses on your potential and your enthusiasm and what you can offer. And then once you're in the interview, follow some of my tips about crafting a good story and making a strong argument for why you are ready for that job now. And just focus on what you can do and what you do have and not what you don't have. So on that note, I'm going to leave it there. But thank you so much for watching. Let's do a quick summary, shall we? Okay, here's the summary. Things that will help you, all right? You should be looking at LinkedIn and Xing for jobs. Use Kununu and Glassdoor to get a feeling for what kind of work environment you'll be dealing with. Gehalt.de for understanding what kind of level of income you can actually realistically ask for. And then focus on what you can do. Show them your soft skills through the interview and through the cover letter. Don't ignore them in the cover letter. Don't just talk about tech. Really talk about the whole package. And understand that generally in Germany, it is a more traditional conservative approach to hiring. This does throw up some walls for you. It will be a little bit harder if you don't speak German. It will be a little harder still if you don't have any sort of certification or degree or course of study, include boot camps in that, from Germany. They really do value those things, unfortunately. But there are people who are a bit more forward thinking and who aren't going to always look for those things. So just keep on the lookout for it. If you're looking for ways to improve, maybe you're like half a year to a year away from applying for jobs in Germany, focus on improving your German, focus on building projects that prove you know your tech stack. I would say those two things would help you a lot, regardless of what your background is. And as I've mentioned in some other videos, no matter what your background is, I truly believe you can find links to programming. I'll actually include another link to a conference presentation I gave, which was all about how being an opera singer prepared me for a programming career. Now, if I can find those similarities and draw those conclusions, then I'm sure you can, regardless of your background. So I wish you all the best of luck in your search. I hope you have found this video useful and that it has answered some of your questions. Please feel free to keep asking me questions in the comments or on Twitter, and I will do my best to answer them for you. Thank you so much for watching.